Welcome to a bonus edition of Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine. I'm Joe Reed. Today we're talking about how women made music, a new audiobook that offers a fresh perspective on music history by centering the voices and experiences of women artists. The book, drawn from NPR Music's Turning the Tables, brings together the work of about 85 writers to explore the impact of 143 musicians across genres and generations who have shaped popular music. With contributions from NPR's extensive archives, the audiobook interweaves artist interviews with insightful essays, creating a rich, multi-voice conversation about creativity, influence, and community. It's a compelling listen, so much so that How Women Made Music is AudioFile Magazine's first audiobook club selection for 2025. You can visit audiofilemagazine.com to explore exclusive narrator videos, playlists, and discussion resources for your group, library, or organization. We're going to dive deeper into the book and the stories behind it. I'm joined by Alison Fensterstock, the book's editor, and Ann Powers, co-creator of Turning the Tables. She's a critic and NPR music correspondent. Ann wrote the book's introduction and several in-depth pieces, bringing her deep knowledge and passion for music history to this project. Together, we'll discuss how women-made music came together, the importance of rethinking music history, and the unique experience of hearing these voices come to life in the audiobook. And we're going to begin at the beginning. Here's Ann Powers with the origin story of Turning the Tables, the project that began it all.
The project originated from a conversation that Alison and I had with our friend and frequent collaborator, Jill Sternheimer, who at the time was the director of public programs at Lincoln Center. We were in New Orleans at a festival and had seen the guitarist Barbara Lynn play an amazing rip-roaring set. And we were thinking about her as a pioneer of electric guitar. I mean, I think when we saw her play, she was maybe in her 70s. And we just started talking about how she's never on those lists of like the greatest guitarists of all time. And that led to a larger conversation about how women are often either excluded from these kinds of lists of musical greats or kind of banished to the mid area, never number one. And just generally continued this conversation for a couple of years about how to think differently about music history through the lens of women artists, women at all levels participating in music culture. And that led us to create this platform called Turning the Tables. And over the course of several years, we did shows, we published a lot of material on the web, we had a podcast, we made videos, all intended to celebrate, honor, and expose people to artists who were underrepresented, overlooked, hidden in plain sight. And what we discovered in doing that is that telling the story of popular music through the stories of women changes how we think about popular music entirely. And that was really the payoff of the series.
And you don't miss anything, when you tell the whole story just without men in it for a minute. And I thought that was the greatest part of Anne's hypothesis that proved out, even in that first season, is you're not losing any part of the narrative, like no technological advancements, no important like political or cultural interventions. You can tell like everything that happened in this sort of 100 years of like Western popular music without men, and nothing is lacking.
Exactly. Except the men. We can let them in later.
Alison, what did you want to do with How Women Made Music? What was the impetus for the book and the audiobook?
Well, I mean, this was an idea that came from NPR Music. There was such a wealth of material. I think at the time, when the book turned into an idea, it had been 5 years of turning the tables material, and it went all over the place. It started with a list of the 150 greatest albums by women in music. Then there was a series of essays about pre-album era originators of blues and gospel and jazz and early country. And then there was sort of a future gazing series where all of these critics and reporters sort of opined about which artists that were just emerging at that time would come to be the most influential in the future. And then it seemed like a natural idea to sort of compile it into a book to tell that story, of the history of pop music without men. And we also had access to this wonderful vault, this treasure trove, which was the NPR archive itself, from the whole entity going back to its founding in the early 70s. And so we had these amazing broadcast interviews with artists from different times in their career that we were also able to mine and use and put beside these critical takes and these scholarly explorations that were looking back at legacies of women in music. So we also had the artists' own voices, and that was a really crucial part of the audiobook, I think, just having a recording of Patti Smith in 1976 or Tracy Chapman in 1989. And they're talking to each other across time, they're talking to the critics, and the critics are responding to them. And I think it creates this really dynamic call and response experience, again, especially in that audiobook where the real voices are there.
Let's talk about the book structure because it's not chronological but organized thematically with headings like tradition bearers and breakers, warriors, teenage kicks, live, storytellers, empaths. There are more. So, Allison, what were some of the decisions that went into choosing this format and using themes as a way to organize the book?
Yeah, I like to think that was almost a way of tricking the reader, or the listener in the audiobook's case, to not be able to skip to what they knew would be their favorite parts. Like to not buy the book and say, "Well, I really only want to read about country and R&B," or like, "I don't really like anything recorded after 1975." But the way this book is organized, it forces you to look at all these artists placed next to each other and imagine the connections in different ways, like not chronology and not genre. No, I think one of the really cool things about the thematic organization is you see how really disparate artists approached things like solving a similar problem 50 years apart, or talking about what might be a universal theme like heartbreak or fighting against social injustice.
Yeah, motherhood or collaboration, all these different themes, style, fashion. Allison did such an amazing job coming up with these categories that allowed for this kind of like truly kaleidoscopic view. You know how in a kaleidoscope when all the pieces fall together in different patterns? I feel like this book really does that.
Well, we also see artists appearing in more than one section. There might be a quote from Laura Nero in the teenage section, but then somebody is writing about her in another section, for example.
Right.
And Allison, I love the fluidity of that.
No, that was so fun to put together because one of my favorites is there's a blurb from the greatest albums list about Laurie Anderson's Big Machine, which is someone looking back at this great body of work she's had as such like an innovative and eccentric artist. And then we have this super, super early interview with her from NPR in the 70s where she's just talking about how she built an instrument out of like a bicycle wheel and a violin string or something. And again, that's they interact with each other. And I think it just makes for such a cool conversation. One of the things I'm very proud of that I think the book does is it addresses all the different ways that we engage with music, whether you're, a performer, a songwriter, a producer, a listener, a dancer, somebody marching on a protest and sort of being buoyed up by a song that's giving you like the strength to fight. And there are just all these different ways that music interacts with our lives. And I think all these different kinds of voices together really show that.
We're going to pause here for a quick break. This is a bonus edition of Behind the Mic with AudioFile magazine. We're talking about how women made music with the editor, Alison Fensterstock, and contributor, Ann Powers. Welcome back. If you just joined me, my guests are Alison Fensterstock and Ann Powers. Alison is the editor of the book How Women Made Music, and Ann is a contributor, critic, and NPR music correspondent. I love the artists talking about their creative processes and the influence of other musicians on their art.
Well, we talk a lot about community, and it can be a kind of a cliched word, but I can tell you for myself, as someone who's been in the music world for so long, women survive through community. Women survive through, make forging bonds with each other, giving each other breaks, lifting each other up. That is how women keep going in an industry and in a culture that thrives on their energy but hasn't always respected them.
I loved finding all of these quotes, like just out there waiting to be mined, where artists were spontaneously talking about how much they admired other artists or like how much they appreciated collaborations or covers. Like we have Carole King talking to Terry Gross about what it felt like when she heard Aretha Franklin sing Natural Woman and how that
Yeah.
blew her mind because it was her piece of art made into a totally different piece of art by someone who just awed her so much. Or we have Queen Latifah talking about how much she loves Lauryn Hill, or one of my favorites, which is especially good in the audiobook because you can hear her voice, is Joni Mitchell talking about how she was talking to Georgia O'Keeffe about how Joni painted.
I was always an artist. I was always the school artist, and I had a kind of a precocious ability to render. And I was putting up drawings for a parent-teacher day in the 6th grade when a man named Mr. Kratzman, the 7th grade, one of the two great 7th grade teachers, came up to me and said, "You like to paint?" And I said, "Yes." He said to me, "If you can paint with a brush, you can paint with words." Now that is a tremendous gift to give a young child. When I met Georgia O'Keeffe, she was in her 90s, and she said to me, "Well, I would have liked to have been a musician too, but you can't do both." And I said, "Oh, yes, you can." And she leaned in on her elbows and said, "Really? I would have liked to have played the violin." I said, "Well, take it up, Georgia, I mean, start today,
Never too late.
So you have these interactions that are they feel so alive.
I honestly felt as though I were at a party with fabulous musicians and writers, all talking about music.
I love
Awesome.
It
that.
really is that approachable.
That's so great. I love that.
Alison, as we just heard, the book contains the artist's own voices, and that's been excerpted from longer interviews done by NPR over the years. And going through the NPR archives had to have been both an utter delight and, oh my Lord, what a task. So how did you do that? Because that is an enormous amount of material to go through.
I always thought this, and then it was corroborated by this experience, but librarians and archivists are magicians and superheroes.
The greatest people on earth.
And I think the archivists that I was working with were also having fun on this. I mean, maybe they're this enthusiastic with every project, but I like to think they were especially excited to get an email being like, "Can you try to find me some more Madonna? Like, can you see if we've got more Dolly Parton or do we have any Lauryn Hill at all?" And they would come back with just files and files and files. And I got to spend hours with these voices filling my head.
I want to add something.
Oh, and please do.
One of the wonderful things about working for NPR Music is that NPR's attitude about music has always been incredibly eclectic. And my team, the NPR Music team, we pride ourselves on that eclecticism. We cover everything: classical music, jazz music, every variety of popular music out there, the most experimental and the most mainstream. You don't find this so often, in music journalism or music criticism. But what that means is that we had this incredible range of artists. If you think about some of the other music websites out there or, radio or audio outlets, they wouldn't necessarily have, a Dolly Parton and a Laurie Anderson both in their archive, but we do.
Alison, will you talk a little bit about how the audiobook came together? Because there's a lot going on with it. We have the essays, which are read by professional narrators, and then you and Anne each read a couple of your own pieces, and then these are interspersed with the voices of the musicians themselves.
Well, so I did not produce the audiobook myself. That was the team at Harper Audio. So I gave them all of the audio that I had in my files and I did all the sequencing. The sequencing is the same as it is in the book and it is as much as possible, for the story flow, it's intended to do that call and response that I was talking about to hear like a real artist's voice and then maybe hear a critic being read by a voice actor saying something that kind of yes ands what the artist says, or like elaborates on it, or goes more in depth on it, or have like a very long piece, like Anne's wonderful deep dive on Roberta Flack, who we just lost, which is like a tour de force that really like explores like the depth of her virtuosity and her genius and her meaning. And then you have Roberta's voice pops right in.
Roberta Flack has always held two souls within her body. From her childhood days onward, she was herself, the daughter of a draftsman and a church choir organist who learned to play music at her mother's knee. This Roberta strove to understand both Chopin and Methodist hymnody and was precocious enough to gain admission to Howard University at age 15. She was a shy, awkward, diligent girl with her nose always in a book and fingers tired from practicing piano scales.
Dedication is the key word. Dedication and devotion, because you may study voice for years and never get a chance to find, as my voice teacher said to me years ago, that light. He used to say to me, Roberta, find your light. Where's your light? Pretend you're underneath it. Find the light. There was, at the time that I was a real student of music, meaning a student at Howard University, and anticipating that I would go on and be a concert pianist, which is certainly my first goal. That was it. But when I discovered that I wasn't going to be able to do that, it was a wonderful thing for me to have the opportunity to move into other areas that would give me a springboard to do something. The idea in my mind was always to do something musical.
It punctuates it in this amazing way when you're listening to it that I think is different than reading it, even though it is also cool to see it juxtaposed on the page, but just that back and forth or that little punctuation is so cool.
I will say that NPR is all about production values and always has been. We have so many great producers, so many great journalists who also can do great radio, great audio. And I think that's one thing that makes this book unique and would make any book that NPR is involved in unique. Not nowadays, of course, we are all, we all have the software and we can all buy the good mic and do this in our homes, right? But archivally, these kinds of interviews just don't exist. I mean, sure, there's a lot of archival material out there from every broadcast outlet, but the combination of depth and sophistication and high quality audio is very rare. I have a plastic tub full of interview tapes, like cassette tapes that I've recorded over the course of my career. Some of them are micro cassette tapes. Believe me, you could make an audiobook from that stuff, but it would be a chore to listen because that stuff is crackly. There's restaurant noises in the background, it's not great audio. So having NPR as our kind of bedrock for this project made it possible to do this very groundbreaking audiobook.
And we just heard you reading your essay, and Alison reads a couple of hers as well. But Harper brought in professional narrators to read the others.
In some ways, I think the use of professional voice actors to read most of the essays is a practical thing. We have so many writers. I mean, Alison, how many writers are in this book?
I mean, I think in the book there's 80 or 85.
So coordinating 80 to 85 people to record their own audio would have been prohibitively expensive and also just incredibly impractical. We'd still be waiting for the audiobook to be done. But at the same time, I just want to speak up as someone who has written several books that have become audiobooks. I'm here to shout out the voice actors.
Oh, you and me both.
I mean, I have people walk up to me all the time and say, "Oh, why didn't you read your own book?" I'm like, honey, my vocal cords are not trained in the way that the voice actors' voices are trained to really capture the nuances of these pieces. And we've all listened to books read by their authors where we've been like,
Get a narrator.
yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, you made that choice and I get why, but as they're hemming and hawing your way through, I'm just wishing for a voice actor,
Yes.
They did use, I think, 4 or 5 different voice actors for different parts
Right.
of the book. With the voice actors next to, the original recorded interviews and Anne's voice on some of her essays and my voice on a few things, I think the effect of
Mhm.
a multi-voiced conversation, people who sound
Yep.
older or sound younger. So you like you said, you feel like you're in like a chattering room, where everyone's at the party and everyone's talking and everyone's excited and it sounds like a lot of different people and it's a really cool
Right.
effect.
And we're going to pause here for a moment for a quick break. You're listening to a bonus edition of Behind the Mic. We're talking about how women made music. Welcome back. I'm Joe Reed. This is a bonus edition of Behind the Mic. The subject is the book, How Women Made Music. And I'm joined by Alison Fensterstock, who's the book's editor, and Ann Powers, who's a contributor, critic, and NPR music correspondent. And in case listeners might be expecting music when they listen to the book, we really don't hear the performances, and I'm assuming it's rights issues as much
Absolutely.
as anything else,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I've climbed that hill, not a pleasant one.
Yeah, it's so complicated. Just for those who don't know, it's rarely the artist who makes that decision. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's whoever owns the masters, owns the copyright, owns the recordings, and that's often a record label, or it could be a record label that no longer exists. That would have been prohibitively not only expensive but just difficult.
There are also a couple of companion playlists that Anne put together on NPR Music on the website. And I've also been hearing either in reviews or from readers directly that people are reading the book or listening to the audiobook with their streaming service of choice open and making their own playlists as they go.
That's exactly what I did at different points as I was listening. And two of them really stand out for me. One was after I heard Margot Price's appreciation of Janis Joplin, I immediately went to one of my playlists and listened to Janis singing Ball and Chain. And then after listening to Carole King talk about Aretha Franklin singing Natural Woman, I listened to that too. And it was so cool to be able to do that.
Luckily, the world is in the palm of our hands, right?
Yeah.
Where most of us are listening on devices that we can quickly toggle from one platform, one app to another, and or even maybe you're listening to the audiobook in an app that also has music streaming. So it's definitely possible. All you need is a deft fingers, deft thumbs, and be careful. Don't get texting thumb, but you can do it.
Yeah, my dad told me that he was listening to the audiobook and he paused it after he read Karen Rose's essay about the Detroit Cobras because he had never heard of them, but the essay made him want to go and download an album and listen to it, and now he loves them.
Love it.
That's fabulous. And another thing I find so interesting about the project and now the book are the writers themselves. They're all women. Many are music writers, though not all. Can you give me a sense of how you brought the writers into the project and how you chose them?
Absolutely. Women and non binary writers. One of the main goals of Turning the Tables was to be a multi layered project, a multi layered intervention in the way we understand music history. It's one thing to approach the subject of women in music, it's another to engage those people who are actually creating the histories and creating new kinds of criticism, new kinds of reporting, new kinds of audio, radio pieces and video pieces. And it was very important to me as someone who's devoted my life to music writing to highlight this incredible community and in fact web of communities of scholars, writers, public radio producers and editors and hosts and artists, all of whom play a role in reshaping music history. Every year of Turning the Tables focus on a different community of writers as well as of artists. So there's this incredible community of thinkers out there who are just changing the way we think about everything to do with music. And I wanted to really stress that that exists.
I was struck by how personal so many of the essays were.
Yes.
We really felt how an artist impacted a writer.
Yeah, this is an interesting development I think, in cultural criticism in general. But actually, it's always been true within music writing that music critics have always been innovative, formally, and have often included their own stories, their own almost memoiristic elements in their work. So there's a history of this. And then I also think we are definitely living in a golden age of the hybrid memoir slash cultural essay, or memoir slash biography. I mean, in my Joni book, there are memoir aspects in the book, and people really seek that. I think I was talking about this actually with a couple of the writers from the book the other night because we had gotten together. Alice Randall, who has this incredible, extremely personal essay about her childhood trauma and how Sister Rosetta Tharpe's voice was a bridge that got her through that and carried her somewhere else. And Alice and I were talking about this. There's an authority in the personal voice right now that people are really longing for. It takes, though, I have to interrupt myself and say, it takes a masterful writer to be able to use personal stories and weight everything perfectly well and balance every element perfectly well so that the personal and the cultural meld and don't collide in an uncomfortable way. And I'm proud to say I think that's what our writers have accomplished.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think also there's a long history of kind of dismissing or disparaging the female music listener and the female pop fan in particular, and their experience and their engagement with the music they're passionate about. When you look at it head on, you think, why? Music is maybe the most emotional of the arts to engage with. Like it
Yes.
causes really, really intense feelings. It can give you really powerful flashbacks to different times in your life, these making these connections with what a particular song did for you at a certain time, or what was happening in your life when you heard it. And a lot of this essay writing, I think a lot of it came from a season of Turning the Tables that Anne put together called The Personal Canon. It honors that experience of being a female individual engaging with music and having this really meaningful experience with it and giving that validity. And I think that's so important.
That was a season that Marissa LaRusso, who wrote an afterword to this book and who was one of our key team members on this project. And our idea for that season, which was both a series of essays and a podcast, was to ask women about the album that changed their lives. Because when we think of the stereotypical record collector, right, we see Jack Black in the movie High Fidelity, being that arrogant record store clerk who knows more than you do and is going to tell you in no uncertain terms that he knows more than you do. And so infrequently are women asked about the experience of being a record hound, And I have to say, Alison is one of the greatest record hounds I ever met. So she's perfect to help to work on a book that includes these kinds of essays. What we found again, though, was when we went to women and asked them, well, what is the record that changed your life? They didn't come back with that stats wielding, trivia wielding response. They weren't like, oh, this is the greatest and this is why. And no, they told stories of how these albums did transform their lives. And again, it's the way in which women's history challenges the conventions of history.
How Women Made Music is a reference book. And I wonder what advice you would give to listeners or readers as they pick it up as the best way to fall into the book, to navigate the book.
Allison, I think you have a good handle on this.
Yeah, I mean I think there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, the way the themed chapters are sequenced, I think that they start with one of the most straightforward and structured organizations of writing, which is the tradition bearers and breakers. That chapter, I think, is an easy entry point if you are the kind of person that opens a book and reads the first page first. So I think, it kind of goes through these themes in a way that you can read it from beginning to end. And you can also I like to think of someone opening the book to a random page and reading a couple of short pieces, reading a blurb from the original 150 greatest albums list, maybe next to a quick quote from an artist. You can pick your way through and kind of play, spin the wheel and see what you land on.
For audiobook listeners, this is again a reason why this book is so suited to our time because, you can jump around through the chapters, let your fingers do the walking, let your thumb do the walking, and almost have it be like a surprise, a grab bag. Every page has something valuable. Yeah, think of the book as a playlist, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a great suggestion, and I think also a good place to leave it. Anne and Allison, thank you. I really appreciate the book and all the work that went into it and the project itself. Thank you so much.
Well, we appreciate you. Thanks for great
Yeah,
questions.
thank you.
And thanks to all who are listening.
That was our conversation about how women made music. I was speaking with Alison Fensterstock, the book's editor, and music critic Ann Powers, who was a contributor to the book. Again, How Women Made Music is AudioFile Magazine's first audio book club selection for 2025. Visit audiofilemagazine.com to explore exclusive narrator videos, playlists, and discussion resources for your group, library, or organization. That's audiofilemagazine.com. This has been a bonus edition of Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine. Behind the Mic is produced by Jessica Lockhart. Robin Witten, Michelle Cobb, Leslie Fine, Ellen Minskoff, Alex Ritchie, and Kendra Winchester are our contributors. Jennifer Dell is our editor. The music is William Ross Chernoff's Nomads 4-Way. Behind the Mic is brought to you by Harper Muse, publisher of Counting Backwards, a moving story of two remarkable women that you'll remember for years to come. Available everywhere you get your audiobooks. And I'm your host, Jo Reed. Good listening.